Good evening, gentlemen. I have already made two videos on India-China relations. The first video I dealt with the border problem with China and the genesis behind it. And in the second, we discussed how China and India are inimical to each other, that is, antagonists to each other, and there's very little chance that they'll ever be friends. It's a question of two swords and one scabbard, and obviously China has the bigger right as it stands. In this video, I'm going to discuss what is the likely scenario further. But before that, I would like to talk about the 1962 war which took place with China. Now, that war is a very sad chapter in Indian history, very sad, I'll say. There were a lot of blunders committed by Jawaharlal Nehru and more so by the Indian General Staff. Now, the General Staff at that time consisted of General Karyappa, then Rajendra Singh Ji, General Srinigesh, General Thamaiya, and then General Thapar. Now, these men had served in the British Indian armies for donkeys of years, but it's on record that not even one paper or a service appreciation, which we call a service assessment, ever given to Nehru that China is the enemy and we must look after the northern border. Nobody suggested anything, even when the Chinese invaded Tibet, and obviously Nehru couldn't decide on his own. So the tendency to blame Nehru is there. Maybe it's correct, because Nehru was the head of the government. But the General Staff cannot be absolved of its responsibilities. I remember of only one general, and he was Lieutenant General Kulwant Singh, who had suggested to Nehru that we must beef up the northern border, and he had written a service paper on it. But Nehru, as usual, had a little allergy to the Sikhs, and his plan was superseded. And that is the end of General Kulwant Singh. There is a lot of talk that Thimaiya had written something about an Alpine Corps, to fight in the Himalayas. But it was just a rudimentary thought. I mean, there's nothing, he didn't put anything in concrete. He didn't put anything which could be relevant. So net result was that Nehru was led, or I would say he was misled, and of course he had his philosophy. His philosophy was that imperialism is a greater danger and China is not a danger. That was his entire viewpoint. And it's very difficult to understand that the General Staff and Nehru knew that the Chinese had started occupying Aksai Chin in 54, 55, and they did nothing about it. They kept sitting on their haunches. And even in 55, Nehru went and introduced Chow and Lai at the Bandung conference. I mean, why he should do it, beats my imagination. And even India was offered a seat in the UN Security Council in 1950, and he turned it down. He said, not at the expense of China. I mean, these are laughable things, but they're very serious at the moment. Well, all these repercussions led to the China clash, and China wanted a border settlement at that time, let me tell you. Twice, Chow Enlai made the proposal, and once he came to Delhi, spent 7 days in Delhi, met all the Indian leaders, including Mahavir Tyagi, Morarji Desai, Govind Vallabh Pant, Pandit Nehru, and he gave a very nice proposal. He said, we recognize the McMahon line as the eastern border because we have recognized the McMahon line in Burma, and you recognize Aksai Chin as part of India, China. I think it's a very valid exchange, but somehow the Indian leadership didn't accept it, and Nehru had a feeling he's a very big man, much bigger than Mao Zedong. And at that time, I think Mao Zedong addressed the Central Committee of the Communist Party, and he said Nehru is acting tough and we must teach him a lesson. And this is what happened. And they mounted an assault with 80,000 soldiers on both fronts, that the Eastern Front and the Western Front, and the Indian army was routed. 3,000 Indian soldiers were killed. Maybe huge number captured. But the fact is, it was a short war, and Nehru didn't have the stomach to continue with the fighting further. And the one reason was the general staff, which was very pessimistic. General Thapar was completely out of fish out of water. He didn't know what's happening. And the air chief at that time, Air Marshal Minu, engineer, I think he was also absolutely lost. He never said anything to Nehru to use our Liberator bombers or other ground support aircraft like the Hawker Hunter against the Chinese. Had they used them, the Chinese would have been defeated. But then, 9/10 of a victory is in the heart, and once you are defeated in the heart, you can't fight, and the Indians couldn't fight and they lost. Now, China, gentlemen, after that has gone from strength to strength. And the latest information which I have about China is that they are planning to launch a manned space mission to the moon. That's a very big thing. The last was by the Americans almost 50 years back. And now the Chinese mission is going to be there. And it just shows the gap in technology between China and India. A lot of Indian reporters, the Indian press is talking that India is the Visham Guru. They are respecting India. India is a very important country in the world. But that is an eyewash. When it comes to brass tacks, nobody wants to deal with India. Look at what happened in Papua New Guinea. They gave a lot of honor, everything to Modi, but ultimately they've gotten the American troops there. Indian troops are not there, and they didn't ask for them. So, gentlemen, China is looking for a swift war like in 1962. Now, this is the point we must prepare. I will discuss this in two aspects. One is a short war and a long war. I'll start with the long war, a long war which means it could spill over into a couple of months. I don't think India had the capacity, the wherewithal, the willpower to fight a long war. That's a fact. The Indian political leadership will chicken out. And the army general staff knows they can't fight China. Firstly, in a total war, let us say if there's a total war with China, all the Indian population centers are close to the border. They're just 100 miles from the border. You take it Lucknow, Patna, Delhi. While the Chinese population centers are 3,000, 2,000 miles away. Shanghai, Beijing, they're way out. And all India can attack is the barren area of Tibet. And that's a very important point. That means if there's a strategic conflict, the Chinese will win. The Indian population will be overawed. We don't have the air defenses. How do we defend Lucknow or we defend Kanpur or Patna? We don't have any missile systems there, position nothing. And the Chinese will have free for all. There is a lacuna for the Chinese, and the Chinese lacuna is that the aircraft operating from Tibet will be at half payload because Tibet is a very height of about 10 to 13,000 feet, and accordingly, the thrust of the aircraft is reduced and the payload has to be reduced for it to operate. But despite that, I'm told there are over 2,000 Chinese aircraft in Tibet, and the Chinese have the Western Theatre Command, which is their biggest command, which is facing India. So, gentlemen, in a long-drawn war, India cannot fight China on its own. And if the Americans come on the side of India, which they will not, unless China threatens Taiwan, it will be World War III. I don't think it's going to happen. So it could be a localized conflict, not a long-drawn conflict, because China also really not interested in a long-drawn conflict with India. First of all, they know the Indians will collapse, and then the Americans may do something silly. They may come in from the western side and all that. So China and then would become the aggressor in the eyes of the world, which they don't want to be. They want to show that they're a very peaceful country. But what Chinese are looking forward to is a short, quick victory like they had in 1962. So, gentlemen, the question is, will such a short, quick victory take place? Now, here is the fly in the ointment. I don't think the Chinese are equipped mentally and physically to defeat India in a short war. Now, let me tell you, the first important point is the Chinese army morale. The Chinese have never fought in mountainous regions at heights of 10 to 13,000 feet. That is first. Secondly, the army, which consists basically of conscripts, are made up of boys who are single children, because China has enforced the one child norm for the last, I think, 30, 40 years from Mao Zedong's time, and you could not have more than one child in China. That is how the Chinese population has come below India, and obviously the preference was for girls. Net result is there's a preponderance of boys, and in most of the families there's only one boy, one son. And if that man dies, that boy dies in any conflict in Tibet or whatever it may be, that family tree will be extinguished. It's a big morale problem. I remember when I was in Singapore, I had a Chinese who was working under me, and he was very worried. He had one son who was on the frontier. He didn't tell me where, but he was worried. He said, "What happens tomorrow if there's an accident, explosion, or a battle, and this boy dies? My family tree will be finished." So there's a morale problem, sorry. And what is more important is that the son also knows it and he doesn't want to get himself killed. That's a fact, because he comes for about 4 years, he's just passing his time and letting me go back. That is why I'm against the Agnipath scheme also, which is something similar. Now, China thus has a moral problem. Thirdly, another bigger problem is that China cannot devote full attention to the Western Front against India because they are facing Taiwan and Japan in the Eastern Pacific. That also is a fact. And the American Seventh Fleet is there. They've got two aircraft carriers, and America has made it abundantly clear that if China tries to take Taiwan by force, they will intervene. So America would be looking for ways and means to put pressure on China. They're going to do it through India, and the Chinese thus do not want a long, prolonged conflict with India. That's why I said the long conflict with India will not take place, but a short war looks imminent. And in that short war, I have good news for people who are listening here. India could give a very good reply, because we have a political leadership that is at the moment fairly healthy and strong. We've got a wonderful leader in Narendra Modi. He knows things. Of course, he misread the Chinese president, though met him 19 times, but the fact remains he's the best bet we have. It's a great solace that we do not have the Congress party in power. Otherwise, they would have sold India down the drain. They've done it earlier. We could expect the same thing again. So, gentlemen, the short war would probably be a Chinese assault in Ladakh and Nepal. They would try at both places. And they could also try a third incursion in Uttarakhand. Now, India has beefed up its forces there, and we have almost 50,000 troops on the Chinese border. And I do not think it will be a total war, in the sense neither China nor India are going to bomb the civilian centers of population. It's going to be a border war. And in the border war, the China is going to find it very tough to beat through to the Indians. The Indians are its professional army. They have been fighting wars right from 1947, then 62, 65, 71, 98, and including the counterinsurgency operations. While in China, they fought one war in 62, which is not to be considered, and then they fought a war only in 79 against Vietnam, and they didn't cover themselves with glory in that war. I mean, they had a tough time, really. And finally, they had to agree to a ceasefire. So, gentlemen, China is on the back foot as far as the short war is concerned. I do not know what will happen after that, because China has to realize that you can't have the cake and eat it too. Let's be very clear about it. China's aspirations are global, and it is possible that they may balk from attacking India. They are looking for a quick victory like in 62. And if the Chinese are convinced that is not going to happen, The Chinese are very pragmatic people. They'll try other ways to undermine India, and they may not attack also. So, gentlemen, my point is that a long war with China is not likely. A short war is likely only if the Chinese are sure to win. And as think they are not going to win, and perhaps they would have made their assessments, and it is possible that the border tension just continue and the war may not take place. But if it does take place, I think the Chinese are going to have a very tough time against India, and it will be shikast for the Chinese, that is defeat for the Chinese. And if China loses that short war with India, it won't have a face to show to the world. And so the Chinese are going to be very, very circumspect about it. They're not going to attack India straight away like that. They will try all other means other than physical conflict. Gentlemen, I think I've given you a fair picture of what is likely to happen on the northern border, but this is only at the short range. We do not know what China is planning further, because the Chinese is a very ancient civilization and they are a dictatorship. And unlike India, we have got a lot of people sitting and talking something else, like the Congress Party, the Samajwadi Party. So many people, they keep on talking against India also. Well, gentlemen, I think now I will close. You got an idea of what I mean to say. There is no cause for alarm. Mr. Modi is in charge. I think he's in control. And the Indian General Staff also is on the same footing. But at the same time, India has not yet made an aggressive strategy against China, and that is not correct. Having a defensive strategy against China is not going to help. We must get ready, if need be, to enter Tibet. I remember when I was doing the staff college course, we had not done any exercise in which we evaluated the entry of the Indian Army into Tibet. Well, gentlemen, I will close now and wish you all the best. Jai Hind, glory to India, and do subscribe to my channel, share it with your friends, and come back for more. Goodbye, take care, and God bless.